The brain is constantly being reshaped by where you place your attention and what you repeat over time. This process, known as neuroplasticity, allows neural circuits to strengthen, weaken, or reorganize based on experience. Every time you focus on a specific thought, behavior, or sensory input, certain neurons fire together. When this firing happens repeatedly, the connections between those neurons become stronger and more efficient. In contrast, circuits that are rarely used begin to weaken and eventually fade. This means your daily habits, what you watch, think about, practice, and engage with, are actively sculpting the physical structure and function of your brain. Attention acts as a spotlight that tells the brain what is important. When you direct focused attention towards something, whether it's learning a skill, solving a problem, or even worrying about a negative thought, you signal to your brain that this information matters. As a result, the brain allocates more resources to processing and reinforcing those patterns. This is why intentional focus is so powerful. If your attention is consistently directed toward meaningful goals, your brain becomes better at supporting those goals. On the other hand, if your attention is fragmented across distractions like social media, constant notifications, or multitasking, the brain adapts by becoming less capable of sustained focus. Repetition is what locks these changes in place. A single moment of focus can activate a circuit, but it's repeated engagement that stabilizes and strengthens it. This is why practice is essential for any form of learning or improvement. Whether you are developing a physical skill, acquiring knowledge, or building mental resilience, the frequency and consistency of repetition determine how deeply that pattern is embedded in your brain. Over time, repeated actions become more automatic, requiring less conscious effort. This is the foundation of habit formation, where behaviors shift from deliberate to almost reflexive. There is also a biological efficiency component to this process. The brain is designed to conserve energy, so it favors patterns that have been used frequently. Strong neural pathways allow information to travel faster and with less effort, which is why practice skills feel easier over time. Conversely, trying something new or unfamiliar requires more energy because the neural circuits are not yet well established. This often creates resistance, making it tempting to fall back into familiar patterns. Understanding this can help you push through the initial difficulty of learning something new, knowing that repetition will eventually reduce that resistance. The combination of attention and repetition has a compounding effect. Focused attention enhances the quality of the neural signal, while repetition increases its strength and stability. Together, they determine what your brain prioritizes and becomes efficient at. This applies not only to productive behaviors, but also to unhelpful patterns. Repeated exposure to stress, negative thinking, or distraction can reinforce those circuits just as strongly as positive habits. That's why being intentional about both what you focus on and what you repeat is critical. Importantly, the brain does not distinguish between what is good or bad for you in a moral sense. It simply adapts to what is consistently presented to it. If you repeatedly engage in deep work, learning, and goal-directed behavior, your brain becomes optimized for those activities. If you repeatedly engage in shallow, fragmented attention, your brain becomes optimized for distraction. This makes awareness and deliberate choice essential because over time, these patterns define your cognitive abilities, your behavior, and ultimately the direction of your life. Vision is often assumed to be a simple process where the eyes capture images and the brain passively receives them. But in reality, the brain plays the dominant role in constructing what you see. The eyes function more like sensors, detecting light and converting it into electrical signals. But those signals are incomplete and ambiguous on their own. It is the brain that interprets, organizes, and assigns meaning to this information, effectively building your visual reality. A large portion of the brain is dedicated to this task, particularly areas in the occipital cortex and beyond, which process different aspects of visual input such as motion, color, depth, and form. When light enters the eye, it is focused onto the retina, where specialized cells called photoreceptors, rods and cones, translate light into neural signals. These signals are then transmitted through the optic nerve to the brain. However, what reaches the brain is not a fully formed image, but rather fragmented data about contrast, edges, and intensity. The brain must assemble these pieces into a coherent picture. Different neural circuits handle different features. Some neurons respond to lines and edges, others to direction of movement, and others to complex shapes like faces. This division of labor allows the brain to process visual information rapidly and efficiently. One of the most fascinating aspects of vision is that the brain does not simply react to incoming data. It actively predicts what it expects to see. Based on past experiences, the brain generates models of the world and uses incoming sensory information to confirm or adjust those models. This predictive nature of vision explains why illusions occur. In many visual illusions, the brain applies assumptions that are usually helpful in everyday life, but lead to incorrect interpretations under certain conditions. This reveals that perception is not a direct reflection of reality, but a constructed experience shaped by both external input and internal expectations. The brain also integrates visual information with other senses and cognitive processes. For example, what you hear, what you remember, and what you expect can all influence what you see. This multisensory integration helps create a stable and meaningful perception of the environment. Even attention plays a critical role. What you focus on determines which aspects of the visual scene are processed more deeply. If your attention is directed elsewhere, you can fail to notice obvious visual elements, a phenomenon known as inattentional blindness. Another important feature of the visual system is its adaptability. The brain can adjust to changes in visual input over time, recalibrating how it interprets signals. This is evident in situations where people wear inversion goggles that flip the visual field upside down. Initially disorienting, the brain gradually adapts and begins to perceive the world as normal again. This flexibility highlights the brain's ability to reorganize its interpretation of sensory data based on experience. In cases where visual input is altered or reduced, the brain can compensate to some extent by enhancing other sensory processes or by reorganizing how visual information is handled. This adaptability is a key reason why vision is not solely dependent on the physical condition of the eyes. Even when the eyes provide limited or imperfect data, the brain can still construct a functional perception of the environment by relying on patterns, context, and prior knowledge. The brain's ability to rewire itself to restore lost functions is one of the most powerful discoveries in modern neuroscience, and it challenges the long-held belief that damage to sensory systems, especially vision, is permanent. At the core of this capability is neuroplasticity, the brain's inherent ability to reorganize its structure and function in response to new inputs, experiences, or injury. When a part of the visual system is damaged, whether in the eyes, optic nerve, or even certain brain regions, the brain does not simply stop functioning in that domain. Instead, it begins to search for alternative pathways and strategies to interpret information. In the context of blindness, this has led to groundbreaking approaches that aim not just to repair the eyes, but to engage the brain directly. Technologies like retinal implants work by bypassing damaged photoreceptors and directly stimulating the remaining functional cells or neural pathways. These devices convert visual information into electrical signals that the brain can process. Initially, the signals may feel unfamiliar or even meaningless, but with repeated exposure and training, the brain begins to recognize patterns and assign meaning to them. Over time, individuals can learn to interpret these signals in ways that resemble basic forms of vision, such as detecting shapes, movement, or contrast. Gene therapy represents another major advancement, particularly for forms of blindness caused by genetic mutations. By introducing functional genes into retinal cells, scientists can restore the ability of those cells to respond to light. What is remarkable is that even after years of limited or no visual input, the brain can still adapt to these restored signals. This suggests that the neural circuits for vision may remain dormant rather than completely lost, ready to be reactivated when the appropriate input is reintroduced. Beyond restoring vision through the eyes, the brain can also learn to see through entirely different sensory channels, a process known as sensory substitution. Devices have been developed that translate visual information into auditory or tactile signals. For example, a camera might capture an image and convert it into a series of sounds or vibrations that correspond to shapes, distances, or spatial relationships. At first, These signals are interpreted as sounds or touches, but with consistent practice, the brain begins to reorganize itself so that these inputs are processed in ways similar to visual perception. Brain imaging studies have shown that in such cases, areas of the brain typically associated with vision become active, even though the input is coming from a different sense. This demonstrates a key principle. The brain is less concerned with the source of information and more focused on the structure and consistency of the input. If the information follows reliable patterns, the brain can learn to decode it, regardless of whether it originates from the eyes, ears, or skin. This flexibility opens the door not only for treating sensory deficits, but also for enhancing human perception in ways that go beyond natural capabilities. Rehabilitation plays a crucial role in this process. Simply providing new input is not enough. The brain requires repeated, structured training to interpret and integrate that input effectively. This often involves gradually increasing the complexity of tasks, providing feedback, and allowing time for neural circuits to strengthen. The combination of technology and targeted training leverages the brain's natural plasticity, enabling functional recovery that was once thought impossible. Dopamine is often described as a pleasure chemical, but that description is incomplete and, in many ways, misleading. Its primary role is not to generate pleasure itself, but to drive motivation, goal-directed behavior, and the pursuit of rewards. It acts as a signal that something is worth paying attention to and working toward. When you anticipate a reward or make progress toward a meaningful goal, dopamine is released in specific brain pathways, particularly those connecting the midbrain to areas like the prefrontal cortex and the striatum. These circuits influence how much effort you are willing to exert and how persistent you remain in the face of challenges. One of the most important features of dopamine is that it is tied to the process of pursuit rather than the final outcome. When you set a goal and begin working toward it, dopamine levels rise as you make incremental progress. This creates a sense of drive and engagement, reinforcing the behaviors that move you closer to your objective. However, once a reward is fully achieved, dopamine levels often drop, which is why the satisfaction of reaching a goal can feel surprisingly brief. This dynamic is essential for survival because it keeps you moving forward rather than becoming complacent after a single success. In the context of navigating a career path, this has powerful implications. If your motivation depends only on large, distant outcomes, such as getting a promotion, achieving financial success, or reaching a major milestone, you are likely to struggle with consistency. The brain finds it difficult to stay engaged when rewards are too far away or uncertain. To counter this, it is important to break larger goals into smaller, achievable steps that provide frequent signals of progress. Each small win triggers a dopamine response, reinforcing the effort and making it easier to continue. Another critical aspect is the role of expectation. Dopamine release is influenced not just by rewards themselves, but by whether those rewards are better or worse than expected. If an outcome exceeds your expectations, dopamine levels increase significantly, strengthening the associated behavior. If it falls short, dopamine decreases, which can reduce motivation. This means that how you set and manage expectations can directly impact your drive. Setting realistic but challenging goals helps maintain a steady dopamine response, while consistently aiming for unrealistic outcomes can lead to frustration and disengagement. Modern environments can disrupt this system. Constant exposure to highly stimulating activities, such as social media, fast-paced entertainment, or frequent notifications, can create repeated, short bursts of dopamine that are not tied to meaningful effort. Over time, this can reduce your sensitivity to dopamine, making it harder to feel motivated by slower, more demanding tasks like deep work or long-term projects. In essence, the brain becomes conditioned to seek quick rewards rather than sustained effort. To navigate a career effectively, it is crucial to align your dopamine system with productive behaviors. This involves creating structures that reward effort, consistency, and progress rather than just outcomes. For example, tracking daily achievements, setting clear short-term targets, and reflecting on improvements can all help reinforce motivation. It also means managing exposure to distractions that provide easy but unproductive dopamine spikes. The ability to regulate and direct your dopamine system is closely tied to self-discipline and long-term success. By understanding that motivation is not something you passively wait for, but something you actively generate through structured effort and progress, you can train your brain to stay engaged over extended periods. This allows you to build momentum, maintain focus, and move steadily toward your goals, even when the ultimate rewards are still far in the future. Focus is not an innate trait that some people have and others lack. It is a skill that is built and reinforced through repeated use of specific neural circuits. When you engage in deep, uninterrupted work, you are activating networks in the prefrontal cortex that are responsible for attention, decision-making, and goal-directed behavior. The more consistently you train these circuits, the more efficient and stable they become. Over time, this leads to an increased ability to concentrate for longer periods, resist distractions, and process complex information with greater clarity. Deep work refers to a state of sustained attention where cognitive resources are fully directed toward a single task. In this state, the brain minimizes interference from irrelevant stimuli and allocates energy toward problem solving and learning. This is where high-quality output and meaningful skill development occur. However, entering this state requires effort, especially in environments filled with constant distractions. Every time you switch tasks or check notifications, you disrupt the continuity of neural activity, forcing the brain to reorient itself. This not only reduces efficiency, but also weakens the circuits responsible for maintaining focus. Task switching carries a hidden cost known as attentional residue. When you move from one task to another, a portion of your attention remains stuck on the previous activity. This residue limits your ability to fully engage with a new task, leading to shallower thinking and lower performance. Repeated exposure to this pattern trains the brain to operate in a fragmented way, making it increasingly difficult to sustain deep focus. Over time, this can reduce your capacity for critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving, skills that are essential for long-term success in any field. In contrast, when you deliberately practice deep work, you strengthen the brain's ability to filter distractions and maintain a coherent stream of thought. This involves creating conditions that support focus, such as setting clear time blocks for work, reducing external interruptions, and defining specific objectives for each session. Initially, maintaining this level of concentration can feel challenging because the brain is accustomed to frequent stimulation. However, with repetition, the neural circuits involved in focus become more dominant, and entering a deep work state becomes easier and more natural. There is also a biological component to focus that involves neuromodulators like dopamine and acetylcholine. Dopamine increases motivation and goal-directed behavior, while acetylcholine enhances the brain's ability to highlight relevant information and suppress distractions. During deep work, these chemicals work together to create a state of heightened attention and learning. This is why focused practice not only improves performance in the moment, but also accelerates the rate at which you acquire new skills and knowledge. The quality of your focus directly influences the structure of your brain over time. Consistently engaging in deep work leads to stronger and more efficient neural pathways, allowing you to perform tasks with greater speed and accuracy. On the other hand, habitual distraction weakens these pathways, making it harder to concentrate even when you try. This creates a feedback loop where poor focus leads to lower performance, which in turn reduces motivation to engage deeply. Training your brain for deep work is one of the most valuable investments you can make for career growth. In a world where distractions are abundant and attention is constantly pulled in multiple directions, the ability to focus deeply has become increasingly rare and valuable. By repeatedly practicing sustained attention and minimizing interruptions, you can reshape your brain to support high-level thinking, creativity, and productivity, giving you a significant advantage in navigating complex and demanding tasks. The brain is constantly balancing between two fundamental modes of behavior: exploration and exploitation. Exploration involves seeking new experiences, trying unfamiliar tasks, and exposing yourself to different environments. Exploitation, on the other hand, involves focusing on known skills, refining them, and extracting value from what you already understand. This balance is deeply rooted in neural circuits that evaluate uncertainty, reward, and potential outcomes. Early in any learning or career process, the brain tends to favor exploration because it lacks sufficient information about what will be most rewarding or effective. During exploration, the brain is highly engaged in gathering data. You try different roles, learn varied skills, and interact with diverse challenges. This phase is critical because it expands your neural repertoire, allowing you to build a broader base of knowledge and experience. It also helps identify patterns in what you enjoy, what you are naturally good at, and where you can improve. Neurologically, this phase is associated with increased flexibility and openness as the brain forms new connections and tests different pathways. While exploration can feel uncertain or even inefficient at times, it is essential for avoiding premature commitment to a path that may not suit you. As you accumulate experience, the brain begins to detect which activities produce consistent rewards, both in terms of external outcomes and internal satisfaction. At this point, shifting toward exploitation becomes more beneficial. Exploitation involves narrowing your focus, dedicating more time and energy to specific skills, and refining them through deliberate practice. This leads to stronger, more efficient neural circuits in those areas, allowing for higher levels of performance and expertise. The brain becomes optimized for those particular tasks, reducing the cognitive effort required and increasing precision and speed. The challenge lies in knowing when to transition between these two modes. If you remain in exploration for too long, you may develop a wide range of shallow skills without achieving mastery in any one area. This can lead to a lack of direction and difficulty in building long-term progress. On the other hand, if you shift to exploitation too early, you risk limiting your potential by committing to a path without breadth information. The brain may become highly efficient at something that is not ultimately aligned with your strengths or interests, making it harder to pivot later. This balance is also influenced by dopamine and uncertainty. Exploration tends to be driven by curiosity and the potential for discovering new rewards, while exploitation is reinforced by predictable and consistent outcomes. The brain weighs these factors continuously, adjusting behavior based on perceived value and risk. Environments that encourage experimentation and provide feedback can support healthy exploration, while structured routines and clear goals enhance exploitation. Importantly, this is not a one-time transition, but an ongoing cycle. Even at advanced stages of a career, periods of exploration are necessary to adapt to new technologies, industries, or opportunities. Similarly, periods of focused exploitation are required to maintain and deepen expertise. The most effective approach is to intentionally alternate between these modes, allowing the brain to both expand and refine its capabilities. Understanding this dynamic gives you greater control over your career development. By recognizing when you need to explore and when you need to commit, you can align your efforts with how the brain naturally learns and optimizes performance. This leads to more informed decisions, better skill development, and a clearer sense of direction over time. The brain is constantly balancing between two fundamental modes of behavior: exploration and exploitation. Exploration involves seeking new experiences, trying unfamiliar tasks, and exposing yourself to different environments. Exploitation, on the other hand, involves focusing on known skills, refining them, and extracting value from what you already understand. This balance is deeply rooted in neural circuits that evaluate uncertainty, reward, and potential outcomes. Early in any learning or career process, the brain tends to favor exploration because it lacks sufficient information about what will be most rewarding or effective. During exploration, the brain is highly engaged in gathering data. You try different roles, learn varied skills, and interact with diverse challenges. This phase is critical because it expands your neural repertoire, allowing you to build a broader base of knowledge and experience. It also helps identify patterns in what you enjoy, what you are naturally good at, and where you can improve. Neurologically, this phase is associated with increased flexibility and openness as the brain forms new connections and tests different pathways. While exploration can feel uncertain or even inefficient at times, it is essential for avoiding premature commitment to a path that may not suit you. As you accumulate experience, the brain begins to detect which activities produce consistent rewards, both in terms of external outcomes and internal satisfaction. At this point, shifting toward exploitation becomes more beneficial. Exploitation involves narrowing your focus, dedicating more time and energy to specific skills, and refining them through deliberate practice. This leads to stronger, more efficient neural circuits in those areas, allowing for higher levels of performance and expertise. The brain becomes optimized for those particular tasks, reducing the cognitive effort required and increasing precision and speed. The challenge lies in knowing when to transition between these two modes. If you remain in exploration for too long, you may develop a wide range of shallow skills without achieving mastery in any one area. This can lead to a lack of direction and difficulty in building long-term progress. On the other hand, if you shift to exploitation too early, you risk limiting your potential by committing to a path without enough information. The brain may become highly efficient at something that is not ultimately aligned with your strengths or interests, making it harder to pivot later. This balance is also influenced by dopamine and uncertainty. Exploration tends to be driven by curiosity and the potential for discovering new rewards, while exploitation is reinforced by predictable and consistent outcomes. The brain weighs these factors continuously, adjusting behavior based on perceived value and risk. Environments that encourage experimentation and provide feedback can support healthy exploration, while structured routines and clear goals enhance exploitation. Importantly, this is not a one-time transition, but an ongoing cycle. Even at advanced stages of a career, periods of exploration are necessary to adapt to new technologies, industries, or opportunities. Similarly, periods of focused exploitation are required to maintain and deepen expertise. The most effective approach is to intentionally alternate between these modes, allowing the brain to both expand and refine its capabilities. Ultimately, understanding this balance allows you to take a more strategic approach to your growth. By deliberately exploring when you need clarity and committing when you identify the right direction, you align your behavior with how the brain naturally learns and optimizes performance, leading to more consistent progress and a more adaptable, resilient career path.